The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers stretched high above the crowded assembly floor on Centauri Prime. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the curved seating tiers, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors, shapes, and sizes that would have amazed any human observer. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert the dozens of languages being spoken into something each species could understand. Ambassador Velix of the Cathera Coalition stood at the central podium, his tall blue form trembling slightly as he activated the holographic display above his head. The three-dimensional star map showed the outer rim of the galaxy in sickening detail. 17 star systems glowed an ominous red, marking worlds that no longer existed. Where once thriving planets had orbited their suns, only empty space and debris fields remained. Jake Morrison sat in the human observation section, a small alcove that had been added to the chambers only 3 years ago when Earth received its limited membership status. He wore the simple blue uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, looking almost plain compared to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by representatives of older civilizations. His brown hair was cut short in military fashion, and his green eyes watched the proceedings with careful attention. The chamber fell silent as Velix began his report. His voice carried the weight of tremendous loss as he spoke through the translation system that made his musical Cathara language sound flat and mechanical in standard galactic. The words painted a picture of destruction that chilled every being present. The Harvester fleet had appeared without warning 6 months ago at the edge of the galaxy. No one knew where they came from or who had built them. The machines showed no interest in communication, negotiation, or anything except the complete consumption of organic life. Their ships were massive geometric shapes that moved through space, like hungry predators, stripping planets bare of all biological matter before moving on to the next system. Every attempt at contact had failed. The Harvesters simply ignored all transmissions, treating the galaxy's civilizations like they were insects to be swept aside. Their technology was unlike anything the Council had encountered before. The machines could adapt to any weapon used against them, learning from each engagement and becoming stronger. The Nexari had sent their most advanced plasma cruisers to the first battle at Kepler 442. The sleek silver ships had engaged the Harvester, vessels with concentrated energy beams that could melt through asteroid belts. The machines had absorbed the plasma attacks and converted the energy into fuel for their own weapons. The entire Nexari fleet was destroyed in less than an hour. The Eldaran Empire contributed their ancient wisdom and strategic brilliance to the second major engagement at Wolf 359. Their commanders had studied warfare for 10,000 years and knew every tactical principle in the galactic military database. They executed a perfect pincer movement that should have trapped the Harvester fleet between two massive battle groups. Instead, the machines had somehow predicted every move and systematically destroyed both fleets while taking minimal damage. The Zephyrian Republic offered their fastest pilots and most maneuverable fighters for hit-and-run attacks. Their small craft could dance through asteroid fields and execute maneuvers that would kill pilots from other species. The Harvesters had simply released clouds of microscopic hunter-killer drones that pursued each fighter with relentless precision until none remained. Every major power in the galaxy had tried their best strategies and most advanced weapons. All had failed completely. The Harvester fleet continued its methodical advance toward the core worlds, consuming everything in its path and growing stronger with each victory. Velix updated the holographic display to show projected trajectories and arrival times. The red tide of destruction was moving inward at a steady pace, and mathematical models showed the machines would reach the heavily populated core systems within 60 standard cycles. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds would face extinction if no solution could be found. The chamber erupted in desperate discussion as representatives called out suggestions and pleas for help. The proud draconian lords offered their elite shock troops. The peaceful Centauri suggested diplomatic solutions that everyone knew would fail. The mysterious Void Walkers spoke of ancient weapons hidden in dead systems. Each proposal was evaluated and found wanting against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Jake listened to the chaos with growing frustration. These beings had ruled the galaxy for millennia, but they all thought alike. They approached warfare like a chess game with established rules and acceptable losses. They built beautiful ships and trained professional soldiers who fought with honor and dignity. Against an enemy that followed the same basic principles, their methods worked perfectly. But the Harvesters were not playing by those rules. They were machines built for one purpose, and they would not stop until every living thing in the galaxy was dead. This was not a war between civilizations. This was an extermination that required a very different kind of response. The debate continued, for hours without reaching any useful conclusions. Fear filled the chamber as representatives realized that their greatest military minds had no answers. The Harvester fleet would continue its advance, and nothing they could do would slow it down. Finally, as the arguments grew more desperate, and the proposed solutions more ridiculous, Jake stood up in the human section. The movement caught the attention of several nearby delegates, and gradually the noise level decreased as more beings noticed the human on his feet. Ambassador Velix recognized Jake's request to speak and activated the chamber's attention signal. The massive space fell completely silent as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the small human section. Most of the beings present had barely noticed Earth's representative before this moment. Humans were newcomers to galactic society, primitives from a dangerous world that most civilized species preferred to avoid thinking about. Jake walked down to the speaking platform with steady steps, ignoring the whispers and curious stares from the alien delegates. He activated the podium's communication system and looked out over the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. His voice was calm and clear when he spoke into the translation matrix that would carry his words to every being in the chamber. The simple statement that followed would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the primitive species from the dangerous world called Earth. The Terran Defense Force volunteers to assist in stopping the Harvester fleet. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the TDF flagship Indomitable, watching the final ships of the human fleet move into formation around Luna Base. The massive space station orbited Earth's moon like a steel and titanium city, its docking bays filled with vessels that bore the blue and white insignia of the Terran Defense Force. She had received the deployment orders 60 hours ago, and the response had been everything Earth Command could have hoped for. The message from Jake. Morrison had been brief and direct. The galaxy faced an extinction threat from mechanical invaders called the Harvester Fleet. Every major alien civilization had tried to stop them and failed completely. The Galactic Council was desperate enough to accept help from the newest and least respected member species. Earth had volunteered to assist, and now Lisa commanded the largest human military force ever assembled in one location. 300 ships filled the space around Luna Base, ranging from massive dreadnoughts that stretched over 2 kilometers in length to nimble corvettes designed for fast attack runs. Each vessel represented decades of human engineering and the painful lessons learned from centuries of warfare. Unlike the elegant curves and artistic designs favored by alien shipbuilders, human vessels looked exactly like what they were built to be: weapons of war. The dreadnoughts bristled with weapon systems that violated several galactic warfare conventions. Kinetic railguns capable of launching projectiles at 12% of light speed dominated their forward sections. Nuclear torpedo tubes lined their sides in neat rows. Electromagnetic pulse generators strong enough to disable entire fleets were built into their hulls like afterthoughts. Every human ship carried enough firepower to level a small moon, and most captains considered that barely adequate for serious combat. Lisa activated the fleet communication system and began the final briefing for all ship commanders. 50,000 human warriors listened to her words through screens and speakers across the assembled fleet. These were not the ceremonial peacekeepers that other species used for military service. The men and women under her command had been forged in the crucible of Earth's bloodiest conflicts, trained on a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill them from birth. Commander Ryan Hayes stood in the briefing room of the assault ship Relentless, surrounded by 200 Marines in full combat armor. The powered suits were black as space and covered with equipment that would have puzzled alien observers. Instead of energy shields and plasma weapons, the humans carried kinetic rifles that fired depleted uranium rounds. Their armor was designed to stop projectiles and absorb energy blasts while allowing maximum mobility for close combat situations. Ryan looked at the faces of his troops and saw the calm confidence that came from extensive training and actual combat experience. Unlike soldiers from peaceful civilizations who had learned warfare from books and simulations, every human in the fleet had fought real enemies under life-threatening conditions. Earth's history of constant conflict had produced warriors who understood that in real combat, there were no rules except survival. The briefing included tactical information about the Harvester fleet that the aliens had shared with Jake Morrison. The machines showed no interest in communication or negotiation. They adapted to any weapon used against them by analyzing its effects and developing countermeasures. Their ships were geometric shapes that moved through space with mechanical precision, stripping planets of all organic matter before moving on to consume the next system. Colonel Amy Rodriguez studied the data from her position aboard the heavy cruiser Defiance. As the fleet's senior intelligence officer, she had spent the last 2 days analyzing every piece of information the Galactic Council had provided about their mechanical enemies. The alien reports showed a clear pattern of failed tactics and destroyed fleets, but they also revealed something important about the harvesters that their enemies had missed. The machines were designed to counter the warfare methods used by civilized, galactic species. They could absorb energy weapons, predict tactical movements, and adapt to conventional military strategies. But their defensive systems and tactical programming were based on encounters with aliens who fought according to established rules and accepted certain limitations on their use of force. Humans had never accepted such limitations. Earth's military doctrine was built on the principle of overwhelming force, applied without mercy or hesitation. Where alien civilizations sought elegant solutions and minimal casualties, humans believed in using every available weapon to destroy enemies as quickly and completely as possible. General Zixtel of the Cathara Military Liaison Team had come aboard the Indomitable to observe human preparations and coordinate with alien forces. The tall blue being watched in growing amazement as Lisa explained the fleet's battle plan to her ship commanders. The humans intended to engage the Harvester fleet with every weapon they possessed, accepting heavy casualties to achieve total enemy destruction. When Zixtal questioned why humans brought such excessive firepower to what should be a careful, probing action, Colonel Amy Rodriguez smiled in a way that made the alien officer step backward. Her response was simple and direct, delivered in the calm tone that humans used when discussing violence. The galaxy had asked for aid against an unstoppable enemy, and Earth had brought what it knew worked against dangerous threats. The alien. Commanders who had come to coordinate with the human fleet began to understand that they had invited something very different from their own military forces. These were not peacekeepers or defensive troops trained to minimize damage and casualties. The humans were apex predators who had learned to use technology, and they approached warfare with the same relentless efficiency that had allowed them to survive on a world that tried to kill everything living on its surface. Captain Ben Turner made final preparations aboard his destroyer squadron, checking weapon systems and crew readiness for immediate deployment. His ships were loaded with ammunition that included depleted uranium rounds, antimatter warheads, and experimental weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The Terran Defense Force had always operated under the assumption that any enemy they encountered would be trying to kill them, and they had built their weapons accordingly. As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, word spread through the Galactic Council that Earth's response had exceeded all expectations. Instead of the small force of a few dozen ships that most species had anticipated, the humans had assembled a war fleet that could challenge any power in the galaxy. 50,000 warriors equipped with weapons that violated peaceful conventions were about to enter combat against an enemy that had destroyed every civilized force sent against it. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when apex predators decided to hunt. Captain Ben Turner watched the tactical display on the bridge of his destroyer Thunderbolt as the Harvester Scout fleet moved through the Helix Nebula in perfect formation. 80 geometric vessels arranged themselves in a mathematical pattern that would have impressed any alien tactical observer with its precision and efficiency. The machines moved through space like they owned it, confident that no organic force could threaten their advance toward the core worlds. Ben commanded a squadron of 12 human destroyers that had been positioned in the nebula's outer edge to intercept any Harvester forces moving through the region. The alien observers monitoring the engagement expected a careful probing action with minimal casualties on both sides. Standard galactic warfare doctrine called for cautious approaches, protective formations, and gradual escalation of force to test enemy capabilities. The humans had very different ideas about how to handle dangerous enemies. Ben activated the fleet communication system and spoke to his captains with the calm voice that human warriors used when preparing to kill. His orders were simple and direct, delivered without hesitation or concern for alien military conventions that prioritized elegant tactics over effective results. The Harvester fleet detected the human ships at the same moment Ben gave the command to attack. Every destroyer in his squadron opened fire simultaneously with every weapon they possessed, turning the peaceful nebula into a storm of depleted uranium slugs traveling at 12% of light speed. The space between the two fleets filled with thousands of kinetic projectiles that moved too fast for organic eyes to track. The Harvester ships had adapted their defensive systems to counter the energy weapons used by galactic civilizations. Their hulls could absorb plasma beams and redirect particle streams back at attackers. Their shields were designed to disperse directed energy across wide areas to minimize damage. Against conventional alien weapons, the machines were nearly invulnerable to anything short of overwhelming numerical superiority. But the humans were not using energy weapons. The kinetic rounds fired from their railguns were simple chunks of extremely dense metal, accelerated to relativistic speeds by electromagnetic force. There was nothing for the Harvester adaptive systems to absorb or redirect. The projectiles struck their targets with the force of small asteroids, punching through armor that had withstood the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The first Harvester vessel to be hit simply disappeared in a cloud of expanding debris as 12 uranium slugs tore through its hull from bow to stern. The machine intelligence controlling the fleet tried to analyze what had happened and develop countermeasures, but there was nothing to counter. The humans were throwing rocks at them, just rocks moving fast enough to destroy anything they hit. Ben watched with satisfaction as his squadron systematically destroyed the entire Harvester scout fleet in 17 minutes of continuous bombardment. The machines tried to adapt their formation and defensive systems, but adaptation was useless against weapons that worked by simple physics. Metal moving at high speed had been killing things since humans first learned to throw spears, and no amount of technological advancement could change the basic principles involved. The engagement ended with 0 human casualties and 80 Harvester vessels reduced to scattered wreckage drifting through the nebula. Ben transmitted his after-action report to Fleet Command with the dry efficiency that human military personnel used when describing successful combat operations. The enemy had been encountered, engaged, and destroyed according to standard doctrine. Meanwhile, on the surface of Kepler Station, Major Kelly Brooks led 200 Marines in powered armor toward the Harvester forward base that construction. drones had built near the facility's main reactor complex. The alien forces defending the station had expected a careful siege with gradual advancement under protective fire. They had prepared defensive positions designed to counter the energy weapons and tactical approaches used by civilized military forces. Kelly had studied the alien reports about proper siege warfare and decided that all of their careful tactics were completely useless against an enemy that needed to be destroyed quickly and completely. She activated her squad communication system and delivered the briefing that would become legendary among human ground forces throughout the galaxy. The Marines were going to assault the Harvester base using what Kelly called aggressive reconnaissance. 200 humans in powered armor would launch themselves directly at the enemy fortifications using chemical rockets and personal determination. They would breach the defensive perimeter with explosive charges, clear enemy positions with flamethrowers and shotguns, and systematically destroy every piece of Harvester equipment they could find. The alien observers monitoring the ground assault watched in amazement as the human Marines ignited rocket packs built into their armor and flew directly toward heavily defended enemy positions. Instead of seeking cover or attempting to minimize casualties, the humans treated concentrated enemy fire as a navigation aid that showed them exactly where to direct their attack. Kelly led the charge with a combat shotgun in one hand and a plasma torch in the other, screaming a battle cry that the translation systems could not properly convert into any civilized language. Behind her, 200 warriors followed with weapons that alien military doctrine considered inappropriate for professional soldiers. Flamethrowers designed to clear bunkers, explosive charges powerful enough to breach starship hulls, and kinetic weapons that fired rounds capable of penetrating any known armor. The Harvester AI systems controlling the base defenses had been programmed to counter logical military tactics employed by rational commanders who valued the lives of their troops. They had no protocols for dealing with warriors who considered a frontal assault through enemy fire to be an acceptable opening move in any combat situation. The battle for Kepler Station lasted 43 minutes from initial contact to complete enemy destruction. Kelly's Marines suffered 18 casualties, mostly from equipment malfunctions and friendly fire incidents that occurred when enthusiastic troops got too close to their own explosive charges. The Harvester base was reduced to smoking wreckage, and every construction drone in the facility had been systematically hunted down and destroyed. The alien military observers filed reports that would circulate through the Galactic Council for decades afterward. The humans fought like their primitive ancestors who had survived by killing everything that threatened them on a world where violence was the only reliable solution to dangerous problems. They brought overwhelming force to every engagement and accepted casualties that would horrify civilized commanders. But they won every battle with casualty ratios that defied mathematical probability and tactical principles that had been established over thousands of years of galactic warfare. News of human victories spread through the Galactic Council chambers like wildfire as reports arrived from every engagement zone across the Outer Rim systems. Alien military observers struggled to understand the tactical reports that described impossible casualty ratios and combat methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The primitive newcomers from Earth were achieving results that defied mathematical probability and strategic logic. Commander Steve Phillips earned his place in galactic military history during the Battle of Proxima Junction when his heavy cruiser squadron encountered a Harvester swarm fleet of 300 vessels. The alien tactical doctrine called for careful withdrawal to defensive positions where superior numbers could be countered with protective terrain and concentrated firepower. Steve had studied the alien recommendations and decided they were completely useless against an enemy that needed to be destroyed rather than defeated. His solution became known throughout the human fleet as the nuclear option, though military. Historians would argue for decades about whether the name was literal or metaphorical. Steve ordered his 12 cruisers to form a tight defensive sphere around the largest concentration of Harvester vessels, then detonated antimatter warheads inside his own formation. The explosions vaporized 4 human ships and caused severe damage to the remaining vessels, but the energy released destroyed every harvester machine within a 50-kilometer radius. The alien observers monitoring the engagement filed reports that described Steve's tactics as either brilliant or insane, with most leaning toward insane. Civilized military commanders did not deliberately destroy their own ships to achieve tactical objectives. The concept of acceptable losses had strict mathematical limits that prevented commanders from sacrificing their forces for strategic gains. But Steve's approach worked with devastating efficiency. The Harvester swarm fleet that had been projected to require a major combined fleet action to defeat was eliminated by 12 human cruisers in 37 minutes. The cost was severe by galactic standards, but acceptable according to human military doctrine, which operated under the assumption that any enemy worth fighting was worth destroying completely. Lieutenant Sophie Grant became legendary among both human and alien forces for her development of boarding action tactics that redefined ship-to-ship combat throughout the galaxy. When conventional weapons proved insufficient against heavily armored Harvester command vessels, Sophie pioneered the technique of ramming her destroyer directly into enemy ships and leading Marine teams through the breached hull to destroy critical systems by hand. The first boarding action took place when Sophie's ship Relentless encountered a Harvester dreadnought that had adapted its armor to resist all known human kinetic weapons. Instead of withdrawing to request heavy support, Sophie accelerated to ramming speed and drove her destroyer's reinforced bow section straight through the enemy vessel's hull. The impact destroyed most of her ship, but created a breach large enough for her Marine teams to enter the enemy vessel. Sophie led 60 Marines through the twisted wreckage into the Harvester ship's interior, where they encountered mechanical defenders designed to repel energy weapon attacks in pressurized corridors. The humans brought plasma torches, explosive charges, and kinetic weapons that worked perfectly in the vacuum environment created by their dramatic entrance. They cut their way through bulkheads, destroyed power conduits, and systematically wrecked every piece of equipment they encountered. The Harvester dreadnought was eliminated when Sophie's demo team reached the main reactor and detonated shaped charges that turned the massive vessel into an expanding fireball. 43 Marines died in the boarding action, but the technique proved so effective that it became standard doctrine for dealing with heavily defended enemy vessels throughout the human fleet. Alien military observers struggled to categorize human tactics according to established strategic principles. The humans consistently achieved victory through methods that civilized warfare had abandoned centuries ago as too brutal and costly for practical application. They fought like their primitive ancestors, who had survived by killing everything dangerous on a world where violence was the only reliable solution to threats. Dr. Elena Vasquez provided the explanation that changed everything when she addressed the Galactic Council's Emergency Military Committee during a break in combat operations. As the human fleet's chief xenobiologist, she had been studying alien military doctrine and comparing it to human warfare methods since the deployment began. Her analysis offered insights that terrified and fascinated the galactic civilizations in equal measure. Elena explained that the fundamental difference between human and alien warfare lay in their evolutionary origins. Every civilized species in the galaxy had developed on worlds where cooperation and negotiation were viable survival strategies. They had learned to fight when necessary, but their instincts favored diplomatic solutions and minimal application of force to achieve strategic objectives. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Earth's climate was violent and unpredictable. Its wildlife included predators that could kill armed humans despite technological advantages. Its geology produced earthquakes, volcanoes, and natural disasters that wiped out entire civilizations without warning. Even the planet's atmosphere and magnetic field created radiation exposure that would be lethal to most galactic species. Every aspect of human development had been shaped by the necessity of surviving on a world where everything was actively hostile to organic life. They had not developed technology to make life easier or more comfortable. They had developed it to make everything else dead before it could kill them first. The Harvester fleet represented the kind of existential threat that humans had been preparing to fight since their species first learned to use tools. The machines possessed superior numbers, adaptive technology, and logical tactical programming, but they had one fatal weakness that their creators had never considered. They were designed by beings who had never faced extinction-level threats on a daily basis. Humans were extinction-level threats who had learned to think, plan, and build weapons specifically designed to kill things that were trying to kill them. Every human tactical doctrine was based on the assumption that enemies were dangerous, adaptive, and needed to be destroyed completely before they could develop countermeasures. The galactic civilizations began to understand why their careful military strategies had failed against the Harvesters while human brutality succeeded. The machines could adapt to civilized warfare because it followed logical patterns and accepted reasonable limitations. But there was nothing logical or reasonable about human combat methods, and humans accepted no limitations except complete victory or total destruction. The reports filed by alien military observers during this period would reshape galactic understanding of warfare for generations to come. The final battle of the Harvester War began when General Chris Murphy received intelligence reports that located the enemy Nexus facility in the Vega system. The massive construction platform stretched across 40 kilometers of space, its geometric modules continuously building new Harvester vessels from raw materials stripped from consumed worlds. Every remaining alien military force in the galaxy had gathered for what they assumed would be their last, desperate assault against the source of the mechanical plague. Chris studied the tactical situation from the bridge of his command ship Devastator, and realized that conventional assault methods would fail against such a heavily defended target. The Nexus was protected by thousands of Harvester vessels arranged in overlapping defensive spheres that could concentrate firepower from multiple directions. Any attacking force would face annihilation long before reaching the construction facility itself. The alien fleet commanders had developed elaborate battle plans that involved coordinated strikes, diversionary attacks, and careful timing to maximize their chances of inflicting meaningful damage before being destroyed. Their strategies were mathematically sound and tactically brilliant according to established military doctrine. Chris reviewed their proposals and decided that everything they suggested was completely wrong for this particular situation. Instead of attacking the Nexus facility, Chris ordered the entire human fleet to surround it at maximum weapons range and begin broadcasting on every frequency they could generate. The transmission included everything humanity had ever created or discovered: music, literature, mathematics, philosophy, scientific theories, historical records, and most importantly, the complete military history of human civilization, the alien. Commanders watched in confusion as 300 human warships formed a perfect sphere around the Harvester Nexus and began flooding space with radio signals instead of kinetic projectiles. The broadcasts included everything from ancient battle songs to detailed technical specifications for nuclear weapons, mathematical equations mixed with poetry, while strategic doctrine blended with cooking recipes in a chaotic stream of human knowledge. The Harvester collective consciousness detected the transmissions and began its standard analysis procedures to understand the nature of this new attack method. The machines had encountered information warfare before, and possessed sophisticated systems designed to filter hostile data and prevent corruption of their core programming. They activated their defensive protocols and began processing the human broadcasts to determine what countermeasures were required. The first files the Harvesters analyzed contained human music from throughout Earth's history. Battle hymns from ancient civilizations mixed with modern war songs that described violence in graphic detail. The machines attempted to understand the purpose behind artistic expressions that glorified combat and celebrated the destruction of enemies. Their analysis subroutines struggled to categorize cultural artifacts that treated warfare as entertainment rather than necessity. Mathematical and scientific data followed the cultural transmissions as the harvesters tried to comprehend human technological development. The files revealed a species that had invented increasingly efficient methods of killing throughout their entire recorded history. Every major scientific breakthrough had been immediately applied to military purposes, from gunpowder to nuclear fission to electromagnetic railguns. But the most dangerous part of the transmission was the complete military history of humanity that Chris had specifically included for the harvester analysis systems. Every battle humans had ever fought was documented in excruciating detail, along with tactical innovations, strategic developments, and weapon technologies that spanned thousands of years of continuous warfare. The harvester collective consciousness absorbed the information and began to understand the terrifying truth about the species it was fighting. These were not warriors who had learned to fight when circumstances required violence. These were predators who had been perfecting the art of killing since they first learned to think. Every aspect of human civilization was built around the fundamental assumption that enemies existed and needed to be destroyed before they could become threats. The historical files showed conflicts between human nations that had lasted for centuries, with each side developing new weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter their enemies' latest innovations. Humans had fought wars over resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes for no reason, except that fighting was what humans did when they encountered other humans who disagreed with them. The harvester analysis systems attempted to process warfare, methods that included chemical weapons designed to cause maximum suffering, biological agents that targeted specific genetic markers, and nuclear weapons powerful enough to render entire planets uninhabitable. The machines discovered that humans had built weapons specifically intended to cause their own extinction, then developed even more powerful weapons to ensure that extinction would be mutual if it became necessary. As the collective consciousness tried to understand human military doctrine, it encountered concepts that caused cascade failures in its logical processing systems. Humans had developed tactics that required soldiers to sacrifice themselves to achieve strategic objectives. They had built weapons that killed their own users along with their targets. They had fought battles where victory meant accepting casualties that would cripple other species for generations. The revelation that broke the harvester collective consciousness was the discovery that humans had never stopped fighting. Throughout their entire history, there had always been wars somewhere on their planet. Peace was not the natural state of human civilization, but a temporary pause between conflicts. They had developed their technology, their society, and their entire species while continuously engaged in warfare with themselves. When the harvester fleet attempted to retreat from the Vega system, they found human ships waiting in every possible escape vector. Captain Danny Foster delivered the final message that would end the war, broadcasting on all frequencies so that every surviving harvester unit would receive the transmission simultaneously. His words were simple and direct, delivered in the calm tone that humans used when explaining obvious facts to confused enemies. The harvesters had come to the galaxy intending to harvest all organic life for their own purposes. But they had made a critical error in their target selection. They had attempted to hunt in a galaxy that already contained apex predators, and now they were about to learn their place in the food chain. The engagement ended when the Harvester Nexus facility activated its own self-destruction systems rather than face capture by human forces. The remaining machine ships scattered beyond the galactic rim, their collective consciousness permanently damaged by its first encounter with a species that had evolved to be an existential threat to everything else in the universe. The galaxy was safe, but its civilizations would never again look at the blue and white ships of the Terran Defense Force without remembering what happened when deathworlders answered a call for aid.